Dad kicked me out for his stepdaughter, then begged me to return when he learned I own half the house. My mom passed away about 6 months ago after a long battle with cancer. She was my rock, and we had an incredibly close bond. Losing her was devastating. I'm 19, and up until recently, I had been living with my dad, who, until this happened, was my other rock, my source of stability. My parents' marriage wasn't perfect, but it was functional enough that I thought we were happy. Losing my mom made our little family seem so much smaller, and for a while it was just Dad and me, trying to figure out life. Then, 3 months after my mom's death, my dad dropped a bombshell. He was getting remarried. I was stunned. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. To me, it seemed like he was rushing things. I mean, just a few months ago, we were grieving together, and now he was ready to move on. He claimed that this woman, let's call her Jane, had been an old friend he'd reconnected with shortly after Mom got sick. I wanted to be open-minded. I understood that everyone grieves differently, and maybe this was his way of coping. But deep down, it felt wrong. It felt like he was disrespecting my mom's memory by jumping into a new relationship so quickly. When I tried to express this to him, he launched into a speech about how he deserved to be happy after everything he'd been through. I felt my heart sink. I didn't want to start a fight, so I kept quiet. I was trying to be mature and avoid conflict, but inside, I was a complete wreck. It was so hard to watch him move on while I was still processing my own grief. It felt like he had replaced my mom with someone new, and I didn't know how to deal with those feelings. Jane moved in almost immediately, bringing her 17-year-old daughter, Emily. I didn't know much about Emily, but I could see how close she and her mom were. They seemed to have this bond that made me feel completely left out. Jane was always pleasant, smiling, and trying to be friendly, but I could sense she was trying to assert her dominance over the household in subtle ways. Suddenly, there were new house rules, changes to our routines, and shifts in how everything worked. The familiar comfort of home was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable atmosphere that made me feel like a stranger in my own space. At first, I tried to go with the flow, thinking maybe this was just part of adjusting to the new living arrangements. But the more I watched Jane and Emily settle in, the more alienated I felt. They had their own little world, and I was just an outsider looking in. It was hard to adjust to the fact that my dad had chosen to prioritize their needs over mine, especially when I was still reeling from losing my mom. Then, the real bombshell dropped. One day, out of the blue, Dad sat me down for a serious talk. I could tell by his expression that this wasn't going to be good. He told me that, since Emily was moving in, he thought it would be best if I considered moving out to make space for her. I was in disbelief. He actually suggested that I give up my room for Emily because she needed it more. He told me I could stay at my uncle's place temporarily while they adjusted to the new living arrangements. I wanted to scream and shout, but I remembered how my dad had reacted the last time I shared my thoughts on his marriage. So I stayed calm on the outside, at least. I chose not to argue or get emotional, and simply said, okay. I packed my bags, called my uncle, and moved out. My uncle welcomed me with open arms. He was as shocked as I was when I told him what happened. It was only when I left that the reality of the situation hit me. My dad had chosen his new wife and stepdaughter over me, his own child, only months after my mom had passed away. The betrayal stung deeply. For a few days, I didn't hear from Dad. I assumed he was relieved that I had left without putting up a fight. It seemed like Dad didn't care enough to reach out. I figured he was happy to have me out of the house. After all, he got what he wanted, right? Emily got my room, Jane got her new life with Dad, and I was out of the way. I remember sitting in my uncle's guest room, staring at my phone, half expecting some sort of apology or explanation, but there was nothing. It stung more than I expected, like I'd been completely erased from his life. I kept telling myself I did the right thing by leaving and focused on getting settled at my uncle's place and keeping up with my college assignments. Then, out of nowhere, the silence broke. One day, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts from Dad. At first, I ignored them, assuming it was more of the same adjusting talk he'd given me before. But then it became relentless. One missed call after another, message after message. He was apologizing, asking me to come home, saying things could go back to normal. His tone had completely changed from when I left, and I started to get suspicious. Why this sudden desperation? I didn't respond at first, but the sheer volume of messages made me curious. Why was he so eager to get me back now? What had changed? Finally, I caved and texted him back, asking what was going on. That's when he told me about the letter. He tried to downplay it, but the more he talked, the more I realized something significant had happened. He mentioned receiving an official letter from my mom's estate attorney, which didn't make much sense to me at first. I knew my mom had a will. She had mentioned it in passing when she was sick, but I hadn't thought much about the details. Apparently, this letter was a big deal. My dad explained, in a roundabout way, that my mom's will had been finalized, and, according to the will, my mom had left her share of the house to me. That meant my dad and I were now co-owners of the house, me owning half, and he the other half. So, while Dad still had his share, he couldn't sell the house or make any major changes to it without my consent. I guess I had assumed everything would go to Dad, given that they were married. But Mom had made sure I was taken care of, and it hit me hard just how much thought she had put into it. Even though I wasn't 21 yet, being 19 meant I had a legal stake in the house. I hadn't realized how significant it was until Dad started explaining that he couldn't make any major decisions about the property without my consent. This news completely shifted the dynamic. Now that Dad and Jane knew they needed me to stay in control of the house, they've been spamming me with calls and texts nonstop. It's not just them either. They've roped in the rest of the family. I'm getting messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all saying I need to be the bigger person and go back home for the sake of family harmony. It's overwhelming. I'm a full-time college student, and I already have so much on my plate with classes, assignments, and trying to balance a part-time job. The worst part is how Jane has started messaging me too, acting all nice and trying to guilt me into returning. She's offered to let me share the room with Emily now, as if that's supposed to make up for everything. It feels so disingenuous, like they're just trying to smooth things over because they realize they've lost control of the situation. They didn't care about my feelings until they realized they needed me. And now they're trying to act like we're all one big happy family. Frankly, it's a lot to deal with. I didn't ask for any of this. All I really wanted was some time to grieve and process everything after losing my mom. I'm stuck in this mess, feeling like I have to fight just to hold on to what my mom wanted me to have. The house is legally half mine, but I'm not sure if I want to go back. Update 1. Hi guys. First of all, thank you so much for all the support and advice in the comments. Reading through your personal experiences has honestly been one of the few things keeping me sane these past few days. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in dealing with complicated family stuff. For those asking, my uncle, let's call him Uncle James, is my mom's brother, not my dad's. He's been nothing but supportive, and I'm lucky to have him as a place to stay while I sort all this out. So, there's been another development. While my dad's side of the family has been nonstop in their attempts to get me to come back, something interesting happened that I didn't see coming. My mom's lawyer paid me a visit to Uncle James's house. I wasn't expecting it, and honestly, it kind of caught me off guard. I had only met the lawyer once before, at the reading of my mom's will, but I didn't really think I'd be hearing from him again, at least not like this.